The second big story of the week in tech that we wanted to talk about was the massive Crowdstrike outage, where again, I think the CEO did a terrible job of taking that responsibility.
I won't try to go into all the technical details because that's even beyond me in some cases. But essentially, for those who know, CrowdStrike, cybersecurity software for the majority of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, frankly. Delta Airlines uses it, major banks all around the world use it. The simplest version of it, even though this is grossly unsimplified, is what your like virus protection should be for at the corporate level. And it's protecting against like hacks and cybersecurity threats because people want to hack these systems and steal money and steal things. They put out an update to their software, specifically Falcon Sensor, on a Thursday night. And because it's security software, they have access to the core OS. One line of code changed like a core part of Microsoft Windows systems that were affected so that they would just constantly get the blue screen of death. And the only way to fix it, you couldn't just like send a software patch because the computers would just keep on crashing. You'd have to have your IT manually go in and like delete a specific file and like then do a reboot, and you got to do it several times. And it couldn't be done like, it has some cases had to be done one at a time, and it's still being done one at a time. In the case of places like Delta is still trying to not have all their flights get canceled. And the end result is that you suddenly had airports just completely shut down. Most of the major airlines just couldn't fly. Government systems were not working. Credit card systems were not working. People couldn't log into banks. It is cascading effect that resulted in what I will assume to be hundreds of millions of dollars in lost economic output and people being stuck at airports for 24 hours until their flights got canceled, and lost profits for lots of companies. And CrowdStrike losing, what, a quarter of their market cap, if not more at this point, deservedly so. It's just a real, like, highlight of a central point of failure where one line of code that wasn't checked properly or wasn't vetted, or I don't know what happened, resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in lost economic output and thousands of canceled flights and all sorts of stuff that I don't even know about.
The angle I think I found interesting, because we were talking about antitrust and M&A, in some ways government policy created this monopolistic security shield that CrowdStrike owns. They share threat levels, is my understanding, and so there's like a good network effect to sharing threat levels. So a lot of people use their system because it detects all kinds of threats, so you benefit from the size of the network. And my understanding is the government sort of required a lot of companies to deploy this after they had data breaches and so on. It was like one of the sort of gold standard. IBM, you can't get fired for choosing IBM. CrowdStrike's great. And the auditing community liked it because it was so credible that when they disclosed your financials, they're like, oh, it's great. And it sounds like they made an error, didn't have a good QA process or testing process or whatever, and the whole world got screwed. It'll be a billions in damage by the end of it, Ben, not like tens of millions.
Agreed.
Yeah, lost economic output and so on. So I wish Lena Khan would focus on those kinds of things and focus on, the healthcare verticalization and less on Zuck buying a $50 million metaverse company. But that's like a businessy, legal sort of view on CrowdStrike.
To me, it's related to the assassination attempt in the sense that some of these companies, departments, agencies, entities, they only have to do one thing wrong once, and their failures are very, very high profile. And while it's fair and reasonable that they get excoriated for such mistakes, I just find that there's sometimes a lack of empathy by people on the outside to go, hey, how many days was there not an incident that we don't know what they did, and that there are human beings trying to human, and that things go wrong sometimes. But I think more interesting in terms of the tech bent to this, I think there's a role for AI here, implications for AI here. The first is if you didn't know before, you now know how interconnected and centralized software is into your day-to-day life and into our society and civilization. And like, this is one of the, in the camp of no shit, right? And so an adversarial AI or government using an AI tool can do a lot of damage if they're trying to do this kind of thing intentionally. People understood that to be vaguely true, but this is a good example of what can happen if something like this is breached at one of these central breakpoints. On the other hand, AI might be part of the solution here, where There's more AI QA before a rollout occurs, or, there's more heuristics in the loop that might account for human error. And it is, it's ultimately human error.
Both points are valid. There's some policies things. There's definitely an AI component. I think there is some real opportunity for some startups and for some decentralization and for some backups and for some QA startups. But also, CrowdStrike did really reduce a lot of people on the team, a lot of people QA. It's I think last year. And whether that is or is not the ultimate reason, it's not a great look to be like, we laid off a chunk of the QA team and now we had this happen. Whether or not it's a factor, it's bad optics. And I think I have a gut guess that there's been a lot of cutting for profits for Wall Street. And there's probably been too much cutting in some areas where, especially if you're highly profitable, to the point where you expose yourself to greater risk. I think we don't think a lot about what greater risk you have if you lay off certain people or certain things versus others. There's a balancing act because it had been overhiring during COVID, but maybe also too reactionary in terms of some of the layoffs. I don't know, but it's just what the look is, and that's not a good look either.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, Ben. And one of the things I would sort of zoom out, first of all, it's funny you mentioned black swans before, because actually I was planning to mention it in the context of CrowdStrike and this outage, where I've seen reporting of it as a black swan event. It is the exact opposite of a black swan event. It was entirely predictable statistically, in the sense that, to your point, Chris, human's going to human. Nobody ever promises 100% uptime. Even, the most reliable services are 5 nines, 6 nines. Shit goes wrong. And so shit went wrong. And you can do the sort of idiosyncratic root cause, what exactly caused this thing to go wrong. But if you sort of view it on the broader scheme of things, it's once in a while, something is going to go wrong everywhere. And so what we're really talking about here is that concentration risk. Like you mentioned, Emil, the problem in our modern society, when we have a small number of institutions or systems controlling such important aspects of the whole world, is when that thing goes wrong, the cost is very, very high. We've talked about it with TSMC and NVIDIA and so on. And Chris, you said, the risk with AI is simply that it causes further concentration. The thing that's interesting for me is I don't think there's an obvious solution, because it's nearly the game theory here is pretty gnarly, where any individual actor is incentivized to just do what's right for them, right? And I'd say, probably every customer of CrowdStrike was acting rationally in choosing CrowdStrike as their vendor, but their collective action meant that there was a global dependency on a single vendor that was really dangerous. And, we saw this also in a different context during COVID, when we had the supply chain crunch, and we see an over-reliance on China for manufacturing, for example. And there were some small moves towards diversification and so on. But the truth is, large systems are more efficient and cheaper. And so following the logic of the markets, you get more and more concentration, because diversification comes with a cost. And so I don't know. I guess I'm throwing my hands up in the air a little bit. I'd be interested in the rest of your thoughts, because I don't think there is a simple remedy to this. And CrowdStrike is only one example of the relatively small number, like I said, of institutions and vendors that control so much of the world.
Cloudflare.
You're picking up on this kind of semantic question of, is it really a black swan event? I think people use the term black swan now to just mean large impact event. It may not be the technically accurate definition of black swan.
I'm a Taleb nerd, so I like using it right.
I understand. But what they're saying is that really, and what we're seeing is that large impact events are becoming more and more common. And as you're pointing out, Yaniv, that seems to be a natural consequence of some of these technology trends. And you're saying, large systems are cheaper to build or maintain. I would say it's not just about large systems are cheaper or better to build and maintain, but rather also that technology, especially networked software, drives really, really powerful flywheels, right? Really powerful flywheels. Whether it's OpenAI and their ability to accrue behavioral data, or CrowdStrike, as you said, Emil, they're able to look at network effects across their network and detect threats across the network. So concentration is a kind of natural consequence of these really big networked systems. And yeah, I'm with you, Yaniv. I don't know what the solution is here. It's not obvious to me that there is one.
It might be we just have to deal with this happening once or twice a year. I mean, look, Cloudflare is in that category, AWS and the major cloud providers in that category. It's not a large group of companies, but it's a strong group of companies. And probably, actually, let's be fair, it's almost insane that it doesn't happen a lot more often in a lot more places, and the infrastructure doesn't go down, shockingly often. And that is a testament to some of the stuff that these companies have built. I can't tell you. AWS went down more often in past years. I can't tell you the last time it did. They have a lot more redundancies internally now. Maybe they'll be the same for CrowdStrike.
I was actually thinking this, Ben. I don't know, this is some combination of, I don't know, good luck and good engineering as humans, but like, as bad as this was, I'm like, it wasn't catastrophic, right? And it's like, if this is the price we pay for all the efficiencies we get the rest of the time, then maybe that's a price worth paying. Like you say, you get these outages and then life goes on. I know, like, a lot of disruption for a few days, but this is hardly, if you look at the long arc of like our current civilization, this doesn't even register as a blip. So it's like, as bad as it is, it wasn't very bad,
That sort of takes me back to my first point, which is that there's a bit of a lack of empathy and a lot of hand-wringing. Like, oh my God, how could they allow this to happen? It's just like, hey guys, 364 days a year, CrowdStrike works perfectly fine. Like, chillax. Things break. I think it's a massive feat of amazing engineering that the world works at all. There's a lot of, small moving parts and a lot of human beings and, soft, mushy brain matter that's making this work. I think we should just be a little bit kinder to each other. This stuff is hard.
You say that, but also like, I can understand a mother with her family being deeply upset that they can't go home because of an error like that, like several levels up, and they're like they're like trying to get home. They're trying to get to a funeral, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's a human element on both sides. And yes, like it is amazing that we don't have it all happen all the time. I get the upset and the angerness, and it's not going to be done yet. Like, they just called the CrowdStrike CEO to come before Congress. So that will be must-watch TV.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think Congress people could read a question about this intelligently that a staffer wrote about? I mean, it's not going to be must-see TV, I guarantee that. But
No. I should clarify, must-see TV from the perspective of, would you like a laugh? Just from people bungling all sorts of questions.
well, I don't think it'll be interesting because all this guy has to do is like talk tech in his answers. They'll be like, I don't know what he said. But I think capitalism generally will mitigate this problem because the cycle is about to start. Just like these massive data breaches. They have a lot of damages they're going to have to cover. They're not going to want it to happen again. They'll find out not just what caused the incident, but how to make a process on top of it so it doesn't happen again, and invest a lot more in that. And it'll happen less frequently. And maybe some competitors come out and they say, well, you have to have a backup plan. And then maybe you have two major players and so on. But the world's like incredibly, like 10x more complex than it was 20 years ago. So I don't see the trend of complexity stopping. I don't see companies being able to be flawless, but the cycle of pain, damages, correction, process will continue just like it always has.
So what you're saying, Emil, is that the free market will provide.
I mean, how do you even regulate this if you wanted to regulate it?
No, I'm not advocating to regulate it. I'm just saying you're fundamentally right, which is that capitalism works because people have to compete for the best idea and the best product. I'm not disagreeing with you generally speaking, no.
Let's just recruit a set of 3 AIs to make all government decisions and help guide the economy and just like put it out of the hands of us. That's what they did in Neon Genesis Evangelion. That seems like a good alternative at this point.
We need to get Ben and Amir on the same show because they're both enthusiastically embracing our AI overlords. I think it's hilarious.
I agree, Emil, that the capitalist incentive means that companies get better and better at doing this stuff. But I also think that we're inserting a type of fragility into the system, right? Which is that these problems will happen less often, but when they happen, they will get more and more, like the magnitude will grow, right? Like I think that concept of too big to fail that came up during the financial crisis for banks, I think there are more and more organizations that are too big to fail. And if you think this was big, again, it will not be a black swan when an outage happens that is 10 times bigger. It is in fact entirely predictable that at some point it will happen.
I'm not disagreeing. Yaniv, I agree with both points that if there's a way to decrease concentration so there's more competition, that's not better. But also capitalism helps companies that will have to pay damages, and it will cost them. Their shareholders will punish them for it, and they'll have to figure out what to do. And as a good CEO, which I think this guy is, he'll have a better answer next time. So I don't think those points are contradictory.
No, they're not contradictory. I agree.